This video is sponsored by Coding Ninjas, one of the best education platform. Check out their project-oriented courses like machine learning, advanced web development, full stack web development, data science, Android, where you not only gain a lot of practical knowledge, but also work on multiple projects. Use the link in the video description to avail 10% extra discount. More on this later in the video. Hey, what's going on guys? Tanmay here for Simple Snippets, and let's continue with the pattern printing programs. And in this video, as you can see on the screen, we are going to study and understand these 4 different triangle patterns. And these are simple triangle patterns, half pyramid patterns, just like that we've seen in previous video tutorials. But unlike the previous video tutorials which had a character that was being printed, over here we are dealing with numbers, and these patterns are specifically called as incremental numbers because as you can see, the number being printed in every row is being incremented by 1 unit. Right? And this is something that is common in all 4 patterns. So all the 4 patterns look different, but this trend of this number being 1 more at every row is common, correct? So even in triangle pattern 2, you can see the first row has the number 1, second row has number 2, and so on and so forth. In this pattern 3 and 4 also, first row has number 1, second row has number 2, and so on and so forth. So since we've already seen the half triangle pyramid in previous tutorials, the for loop is going to be pretty similar with a little bit of change. So we'll go a little faster. I'm guessing you've already seen that. If not, don't worry, we are still going to dry run this entire code. So below every pattern, we have the for loop code, which is going to be in C++ for that corresponding pattern. Now you can use any other general purpose programming language. The logic is going to be the same, be it Java, be it JavaScript or Python. The looping control statements and the conditions are going to be the same. Okay, so you can use any other programming language. We're going to use C++ in the end of this video tutorial to implement all these 4 patterns. So make sure you watch this video till the end, and let's start off with the different patterns. So a quick note, if you understand pattern 1 and pattern 2, then if you see triangle pattern 1 and triangle pattern 3, they are exactly mirror opposites to each other, correct? So if you have a horizontal mirror in between, so pattern 1 and pattern 3 are exactly same, and in pattern 3 we only have to add extra triangle space on the command prompt over here, and that's why in the for loop we have one extra for loop, and we'll talk about it. I'm just giving you a little bit of heads up. And similar to pattern 2 and pattern 4 are exactly same, they are mirror opposites to each other. So if you place a mirror like this triangle pattern 2 will look like pattern 4, and in pattern 4 also we have to add this extra space before, and that's why we have one extra for loop, but otherwise all the conditions are exactly same. Okay, so we'll understand pattern 1 and pattern 2 in detail, and then 3 and 4 will be very easy to understand. So let's start off with pattern 1. Okay, so quickly observing pattern 1, we have a half pyramid, a triangle, and in the triangle you can see we are printing numbers in an incremental way. So for row 1 we are printing number 1, in row 2 that number is incremented but it is printed 2 times. So even that is incremented, that is the number of times that value is printed is also incrementing at every row, right? So for row 3 it is printed 3 times, for row 4 it is printed 4 times, for row 5 it is printed 5 times, and if we had row 6 then we would have printed 6 times, correct? So that is how the pattern would progress. So over here the number of rows is 5, so let's write n equals to 5. So on the right hand side you can see we have written variable values. So this is where we are going to track variable values and dry run this for loop code. And that is how you understand pattern printing programs in the best way. That is, you take a pencil and paper and dry run the for loops and go step by step and keep a track of all the variable values inside the loops. Okay. And then I have also drawn a output command prompt kind of diagram over here. This is where we will print out the values, and just consider this as a basic command prompt. Okay, so let's begin with the for loop and we will understand it line by line. So first thing, we have a outer for loop, and then we also have a inner for loop. So generally in this triangle printing programs, what happens is the outer for loop is always associated with the number of rows. Okay, so since we have 5 rows, n is equal to 5. In the condition inside the for loop, what do we have? We have I equals to 1. So let's write I equals to 1, and then we are saying I has to be less than or equal to n. So we just said n is 5, so I will start from 1 and it will go till 5, correct? Because I is less than equal to n, so which means I has to be less than or equal to 5. So I can take values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Correct? And after that the for loop will stop working. And for increment and decrement we have I++, which means we are going one unit at a time. We are incrementing I by one value in every iteration. So this is very understandable, and the outer for loop is pretty easy to understand, right? As I mentioned, it is dealing with the rows. Okay, so in case if we had 6 rows, in case if we had 7 rows, so we would have I less than 7 or I less than equal to 6. Okay, alright. Now moving inside, we have one more for loop, and this is where the actual printing is happening. Because if you see inside the for loop, the statement is saying cout I. Now cout is a command in C++ which prints some value onto the command prompt. If you're using Java, it would be system.out.println, or if it is C, it is printf, and whatever general purpose programming language you're using, there will be some command which is used to print something onto the command prompt, right? Okay, so this cout is printing I, which is going to be the iterator value, and I'll tell you why we are printing I. But let's first understand what is there inside the for loop. Now what are the values inside this second for loop are very important, because this determines how the pattern progresses. The outer for loop is just for the rows, as we just said, but depending upon the values and how the outer for loop progresses, the inner for loop conditions also change. Okay, so let's see what we have in the inner for loop. So first we are creating one more iterator. We are saying int j equals to 1. So let's write j equals to 1. And now we are saying j has to be less than equal to I. So when j is 1, is it less than equal to I? What is the value of I? We just said I is equal to 1. So is 1 less than or equal to 1? Yes, because 1 is equal to 1, right? So this means this condition is true. And I'll tell you why this condition looks like this. Just a minute. And then once this condition is true, we will go inside the for loop. We are saying cout I. Now what is the value of I? We just said I is 1. So when you say cout I, the value of I is going to be printed. So let's write 1 onto the command prompt. Okay. And then this is the only statement in the second for loop. So you'll again come at the start of the for loop. We'll say j++. So now j will become 2. So let's make j equals to 2. Alright. Okay. So now again the condition will be checked, and this time we will check is j, which is now become 2, is it less than or equal to 1? Because I is still 1. So 2 is not less than or 2 is not equal to 1. So now the condition becomes false. So we will come outside the for loop, and outside the for loop we have one last statement. In the outer for loop we have cout endl. So this endl is again a command which takes the cursor from the command prompt and brings it to the next line. That's why we are saying end line. So that line is ended and you come on the new line. Alright. Okay, so now we are at the last statement. We are done with the last statement in the outer for loop. So again you'll go at the start of the for loop. You will say I++. Right? So that is what is happening over here. So I will now become 2. So I has now become 2. Then you'll again go inside the for loop. Now you'll say j equals to 1. So again j is reinitialized to 1. Let's make j equals to 1. Again we're checking is j less than equal to I. So j is 1. Is 1 less than equal to I? What is the value of I? It is 2. So 1 is less than 2. Correct? So you'll go inside. You will say cout I. What is the value of I now? I is become 2. So you'll print 2. After this statement, this is the only statement in the second for loop. You'll again come at the start of the for loop. You will say j++. So now j will become 2. So now again the condition is checked. So you'll check is 2 less than equal to 2. So yes, again this condition is true now, because 2 is not less than 2 but 2 is equal to 2, and we are checking that same condition. So again you'll go inside the for loop and you'll say cout I, and I's value is always 2 for this iteration. So again you'll print one more 2, and after printing you'll again come at the start of the second for loop. You'll say j++. So j now will become 3. Now when you check is j less than equal to I, that is when you're checking is 3 less than equal to 2, because I is still 2. Now the condition becomes false, because 3 is not less than 2 and 3 is not obviously equal to 2. So now the for loop, that is the inner for loop, will stop working. You'll come outside the inner for loop and you'll say cout endl. So now again your cursor will come on the new line. Okay, so now if you observe so far, we are basically starting to print this pattern. So you can see the trend happening. We first printed 1, then we printed 2 and 2. So when you come outside and when you say endl, you come on a new line, and then again you'll go at the start of the for loop. You'll say I++. So I will now become 3. So now when I becomes 3 and you again go inside the for loop, you say j equals to 1, and j has to be less than equal to I. I has become 3 and you're saying j is 1. So j will go from 1 to, and it will also take values 3, which means that the inner for loop will run 3 times now. And when this inner for loop will run 3 times, what you're printing is i's value 3 times. What is the value of I? It is always going to be 3 for this iteration. So you'll print the number 3 times, and then the inner for loop will stop working. You'll come outside, you'll say cout endl, you'll come on the new line. So I hope you're getting now what is happening. Every time the I value is incrementing, the inner for loop will run one more extra time. And when this happens, when the inner for loop runs for n number of times, that many number of times the I value is going to be printed. Because I is the row value, correct? As I mentioned, the outer for loop deals with the number of rows. So I is basically related to the number of rows. Okay, so again, moving forward quickly, you'll again come at the start of the for loop. I will now become 4. So when you go inside the for loop, you'll say int j equals to 1. So j is 1. And you have to say j less than equal to I. So I less than equal to 4, which means that j will take the value of 1, 2, 3 and 4, because we are saying j plus plus. So which means the inner for loop will now run for 4 times. And for 4 times you are saying cout I. What is the value of I? I is 4. So you are printing 4 times. After that you'll come outside the for loop because the condition will become false. That is j will become 5 and 5 will not be less than or equal to 4. So then you'll come outside and you're going to say cout endl. So you'll come on the new line. You'll again go to the start of the for loop. You'll say I plus plus. I will become 5. So when I becomes 5, you'll again come inside the for loop. Again you'll say j equals to 1. 1 has to be less than equal to I, which is now become 5. Let's make I equals to 5. So I will now run from 1 to 5, correct? Because we are saying j equals to 1. So we are starting from 1 and j has to be less than or equal to 5, and we are saying j plus plus. So j will take the value of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So 5 times, and 5 times what we are doing, we are doing simply cout I. I's value has become 5, so you are going to print 5 times. And then you'll come outside the for loop, you'll say cout endl, you'll come on a new line. You'll go at the start of the for loop, you'll say I plus plus, I will now become 6. Now when I becomes 6, you'll check the condition. I has become 6. Is 6 less than equal to n? What is the value of n? N is fixed value 5, which is the number of rows that we want to print. Now is 6 less than or equal to 5? No. So this is where the outer for loop condition has become false. So now you will not go inside this for loop and you will come outside the for loop. And if you observe in the command prompt also, we have basically got our output that we wanted. We have printed a triangle, which is an incremental triangle which has incremental numbers, right? Okay. So I hope you've understood the triangle pattern 1, which is a half pyramid or a simple triangle with incremental numbers. So now let's move on to pattern 2. This video is brought to you by Coding Ninjas, and they are bringing you multiple project-oriented courses like machine learning, advanced web development, full stack development, data science, Android, and a lot more, with special features that include faculties from IIT, Stanford, top universities and corporate companies, personalized curriculums designed at par with the industry standards, teaching assistants with facility to audio call, video call, and screen share for doubt solving in real time, in-house practice platform with an inbuilt compiler which supports multiple programming languages so that you can practice without the hassle of installing any software, performance tracking to have a complete record of your progress, project development where you build web applications from music to healthcare as a part of your course curriculum, and all these courses come with certification on completion, which will definitely add a lot of value to your resume, and a lot more. Also, you get an extra 10% discount with our unique link shared in the video description. Go to the link in the video description and check out the different courses on Coding Ninjas. So unlike pattern 1, which was starting with 1 element on the first row, 2 elements on the second row, 3 elements on the third row, in triangle pattern 2, we are printing the row number only. So this is row 1. So we are printing the value 1, but we are printing it for 5 times. So if the user enters 5, that is n equals to 5, we will start from printing 5 units, that is 5 times 1. Then you'll increment the number to be printed. So for the second row, you're printing 2 only. But this time you're going to print it for 4 times. Then for the third row, you're printing 3, but you're printing it for 3 times. For the fourth row, you're printing 4, that is the row number 4, but you're printing it 2 times. And for the last row, that is row 5, you're printing 5, but you're printing it only 1 time. So still there is a reverse or inverted triangle, and you're still printing the row number only, but it is in a reverse way. Okay. So in pattern 1, you're printing in an ascending order, that is from 1 to 5. But in triangle pattern 2, we're printing in a descending order, that is we're printing from n to 1. Okay. N is basically the number of rows. Okay. So let's see the for loop for this particular triangle pattern. So as I mentioned earlier also, the outer for loop is basically related to the number of rows that we want to print. But since in this case, we are going in a reverse way, that is we want 5 units to be printed of the value 1, we will say I equals to n. Now n this time is the number of rows is 5 only, right? We want 5 rows. So we are saying I equals to n, and that means I equals to 5. So this is where initialization happens. Now I hope you know how the for loop works, okay? I hope you know the looping control statements, because that is the most basic thing that you need to know when it comes to pattern printing. So initialization happens only 1 time, and over here we are saying I equals to n, which means I equals to 5. Alright. So when you say I equals to 5, the condition that we want is I should be greater than or equal to 1. So this 5 should be greater than or equal to 1, and you are saying I minus minus. So every iteration I will become 1 less, right? So it will be 5, 4, 3, 2 and 1. These are the values that the outer for loop will take in every iteration. And in every iteration what you're going to check is if the number, that is I, greater than or equal to 1. And you're checking if 5 is greater than or equal to 1, is 4 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, it is. Is 3 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, 3 is greater than 1. 2 is also greater than 1. 1 is not greater than 1 but is equal to 1. And when I becomes 0, that is when the condition will become false. So essentially again the outer for loop is going to run for 5 times, and that is what we want, because we want 5 rows. We are just going in a reverse way. So the printing, as I mentioned, happens in the second for loop. So let's go inside now. We've said I equals to 5, and now we are going inside. So in the inner for loop, we are again creating one more iterator in j, that is one more variable, and we are saying j equals to 1. Okay. And now we are saying j has to be less than or equal to 5. So 1, that is what we've declared, j has to be less than or equal to I. What is the value of I? I we just made equal to n, which is equal to 5, and we are saying j plus plus. So for this iteration, that is for the outer for loop's first iteration, this is the condition, and j will take the values 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, because j will increment every time. In every iteration j will become 1. 1 has to be less than or equal to 5. Yes, it is true. Then j will take the value 2, because we are saying j plus plus. Is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes, 2 is less than 5. So again we will go inside the for loop. We'll talk about what is there inside the for loop in a minute, but I hope you're understanding why the inner for loop will run for 5 times again. Correct? Okay. So what happens in every iteration inside the second for loop? Remember we said that the second for loop is related with what is going to be printed onto the command prompt. So in the inner for loop we are saying cout n minus I plus 1. Okay, so this is the expression. What is n? N is 5. What is I? I is 5. What is 1? 1 is 1. Okay, it is a constant. So 5 minus 5 is 0 plus 1. So 1 is going to be printed. Let's print 1. Okay. Alright. So j is 1. And after this statement again you will go at the start of the for loop. J will take the value of 2, because j plus plus, and you will again check is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes. Correct. So again you will go inside the for loop. You will say cout n minus I plus 1. N is 5. I is also going to be 5. Nothing is changing over here. And you are saying plus 1. So 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 plus 1, 1. So again 1 is going to be printed. Now after this statement again you will come at the start of the second for loop, that is inner for loop. You will say j plus plus. So j now will become 3. Let me make the changes over here also. You will again check the condition. Is 3 less than or equal to I? I is nothing but 5. Is 3 less than 5? Yes. So again you will go inside the for loop. You will say cout n minus I plus 1. So again n and I are same and are not going to change. So 5 minus 5 is 0 plus 1. Again 1 is printed. After this statement, again you'll come at the start of the for loop, j will become 4. 4 is also less than 5. Let's make j equals to 4. Is 4 less than equal to 5? Yes. So again you'll go inside, again you'll print 1. After this statement, again come at the start of the for loop, j plus plus, j will now become 5. Let's write 5 over here, and again condition is checked. Is 5 less than equal to 5? Yes, 5 is equal to 5, so condition is true. Again go inside and again say n minus I plus 1, that is 5 minus 5 plus 1, so again 1 is printed. And now when you again come at the start of the for loop, you will say j plus plus, j will become 6, and when you check the condition, you will say is 6 less than equal to 5? No, 6 is not less than 5, correct? 6 is greater than 5. So now the for loop, that is the inner for loop, will stop working and you will come outside the inner for loop, and we have one statement which says cout endl, which means come on the next line. Okay, so you can see the first row is printed perfectly like what we want in the triangle pattern 1. And once we say endl, you'll again come at the start of the for loop. At the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus. What is the value of I? I was 5. So when you say I minus minus, I will become 4. Okay, so now I has taken the value of 4. Again, you'll go inside the for loop. You are saying int j equals to 1 and j has to be less than equal to I. We just said I is 4. And we are saying j equals to 1, and you are saying j plus plus. So the inner for loop will take the values 1, 2, 3 and 4. So this time the inner for loop is only gonna run 4 times, and that is what we want, right? We want to print the value 2, but we want to print it 4 times. So now the inner for loop has to run only 4 times, and this is achieved now because I has become 4. So this condition will make sure that the inner for loop will run 4 times. So let's say j equals to 1, and now we will go inside the for loop because 1 is less than equal to 4, and we are saying cout n minus I plus 1. So now this time n value is gonna be the same because we want 5 rows only, so n will never change, n is gonna be constant, so 5. But this time the I value has changed because I has become 4. So 5 minus 4 is 1, and we also are saying plus 1, which is a constant, so this time what we want to print out is 2. And that is exactly what we want in this triangle pattern 2, right? So now we are printing 2. And after this, again, you'll come at the start of the for loop. You will say j plus plus. So now j will become 2. So j will take the value 2. And j is, that is 2 is still less than equal to I, which is 4. Correct? So you'll go again inside the for loop and you're going to print this same thing again because n and I is not going to change for this iteration. So 5 minus 4 plus 1, again 2. After this, again you'll come at the start of the for loop, j will become 3. 3 is still less than 4, correct? So this condition is true. You'll go again inside, again you'll print 2. Again you'll come at the start of the for loop, you'll say j plus plus, j will become 4. 4 is not less than 4, that is 4 is not less than I, but it is equal to I because I is also 4. So again condition true, you'll go inside, you'll print 2 one more time. And now when you come at the start of the for loop, j will become 5 because we are saying j plus plus, and this is where the condition becomes false because 5 is not less than 4. So now you'll come outside the for loop, you'll print out this cout endl, that is you'll execute this command and you'll come on the new line. Okay, so now if you observe, our second row is also exactly what we want and it is being printed. So when you come at the start of the for loop now, after you execute this cout endl, we'll say I minus minus, I will become 3. So let's make I equals to 3. So when you make I equals to 3 and go inside, again you'll say j equals to 1 for the second for loop, that is inner for loop. So now the second for loop, you're saying j equals to 1, j has to be less than equal to I, and I has become 3. So j will take the values 1, 2 and 3, which means the inner for loop will run 3 times, and that is exactly what we want. We want to print something 3 times, and what is that something? You want to print the value 3. So the expression now will become n, which is 5 minus I has become 3 plus 1. So 5 minus 3, 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, so 3 is printed. And now I'm not gonna go with every iteration for the inner for loop. Of course the for loop, that is inner for loop, will take the value 1, 2 and 3, which means it will run 3 times, and every time the same expression is gonna be printed. So 3 times 3 is gonna be printed. Then you'll come outside the for loop, you'll say endl. You'll come on the new line, you'll go at the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, I will become 2. So 2 in the condition is still greater than 1. Okay, so remember we also have an outer for loop condition. and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 are all the values that can be taken in the outer for loop. So 2 is still greater than 1, so you'll go inside the for loop. Inside the for loop, you'll again say j equals to 1. So 1 has to be less than equal to I, and I this time has become 2. Which means when you say j plus plus, j will only take the value 1 and 2. So the inner for loop now will run 2 times. And inside the expression, you're printing n minus I plus 1. So n is 5, 5 minus I has become 2 plus 1. So 5 minus 2 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4. So you're printing 4 2 times because as I mentioned, the inner for loop will run 2 times. So you'll come outside, we have cout endl, you'll come on the new line. Again, you'll go at the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, I will now take the value of 1. So let's make I equals to 1. Again, you'll come inside the for loop, you'll start with j equals to 1 and 1 has to be less than equal to I has become 1. So when you say j plus plus, which means that you're incrementing j and j will only be taking the value 1 as a valid argument or valid variable value, which means that this for loop will run only one time now and you're saying cout n minus I minus 1. So 5 minus I has become 1 plus 1. So 5 minus 1 is 4, 4 plus 1 is 5. So you're printing 5 and you're printing 5 only one time. So you'll come at the end of the for loop, that is you'll exit the inner for loop. For the outer for loop you have cout endl, you'll simply come on the new line. You'll come at the start of the for loop, you will say I minus minus and I will now become 0. So when I becomes 0, this is where this condition becomes false, right? So I has become 0. Is 0 greater than equal to 1? No. 0 is not greater than 1 and 0 is not equal to 1, of course. So now the outer for loop will stop working and you'll come outside the outer for loop. And if you observe the command prompt, we have basically got our output like what we want. We have printed a reverse triangle and we have printed the numbers that we want in the incremental way. Okay, so this was pattern 2. I hope you've understood step by step because we've dry run the entire for loop. We've also seen the different variable values, that what we've tracked, and we've also seen the output on the command prompt. So if you are taking notes, if you are using paper and pencil method to dry run this code, you should also be able to find this output, get this output. So this was triangle pattern 2. Let's see triangle pattern 3. Now as I mentioned, triangle pattern 1 and triangle pattern 3 are exactly the same, but they are mirror opposites, right? So if you observe this triangle pattern 1, we want 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and this is exactly what we wanted in triangle pattern 1. But over here, as I mentioned, it is a mirror opposite. So we want this extra space to be first created onto the command prompt and then the triangle to be created. So in the for loop conditions in the code, the only extra thing that you need is this one extra for loop, and rest of the for loop, inner for loop, outer for loop are gonna be exactly same. So just go back in this video and see the code for triangle pattern 1 and just exclude this line. So the rest of the for loop conditions and the values are gonna be exactly same. So let me quickly explain what this for loop does, okay? So let's start off with dry running it quickly because rest of the things are gonna be the same. So initially you're saying I equals to 1, so let's write I equals to 1. N is of course going to be 5 because we want 5 rows, correct? So you're saying I has to be less than or equal to n and you're saying I plus plus. So I will take the values of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, correct? Because I has to be less than or equal to n. So I can take the value of 1, I can also take the value of 5. So these are the values that the outer for loop will take and the outer for loop will run 5 times. So when you go inside, the first thing that you have to do is you have to create this extra space onto the command prompt, right? Only then you can print the triangle. So that is why we have the first for loop, this extra for loop at the top, and then this inner for loop which is doing the work of printing the actual triangle. And this triangle is only printing spaces. You can see this is the for loop and we have only one instruction, that's why we do not have extra brackets and I wanted to save space. So in a for loop, when you have only one instruction inside the for loop, you don't have to, put the brackets. This is one thing in C++. And this cout is doing nothing, but you can see it is adding an extra space. That's it. So what are the conditions inside? So if you observe this triangle pattern 3, for the very first row, you have 4 spaces. So you have 1, 2, 3 and 4. then you have 1, 2 and 3, then you have 1 and 2, and then you have 1 space. Okay, so this is what we have to create, and that has to be done in the coding way. So in this we are doing the condition in k. So we have a new variable k equals to n minus I. What is n? N is 5, right? So 5 minus I. What is I value? We just said I is 1. So 5 minus 1 is going to be 4. So k equals to 4, and we are saying k has to be greater than 0, and you are saying k minus minus. So when you say k minus minus, 4 will decrement by 1, it will become 3. So it will take 4, 3, 2 and 1. It will not take 0 because k has to be greater than 0. So k can go from 4, 3, 2, 1, which means this for loop will run 4 times and it will create 4 spaces. And that is exactly what we want for first row, right? This is the first row, we want 4 spaces. So you'll create 1, 2, 3, 4 blank spaces. And after that, of course, we have the same for loop that was there in pattern 1. So you'll print I value, which is 1, and it will print it 1 time. So let's print it over here. Let's write 1. Okay. Then of course you'll come on the next line, and when you do this endl, you'll again come at the start of the for loop. You'll say I plus plus I will become 2. So I'm only explaining you this for loop because this is the only for loop that you need to understand of how the spaces are created, because otherwise it is exactly same as pattern 1, right? Okay. So when I will take the value 2, let's make I equals to 2, and when we come inside, we have this for loop. We are saying in k equals to n minus I. N of course is going to be 5. 5 minus I. I value has become 2. So it is 5 minus 2. And now 5 minus 2 is equal to 3. Correct? So now the k value becomes 3. And the condition is saying 3 has to be greater than 0 and k minus minus. So with every iteration, we will go from 3, 2 and 1. And when k becomes 0, this condition will become false because 0 cannot be greater than 0, right? So which means that this for loop will now run for 3 times. And when it runs 3 times it is going to create 3 spaces, and that is exactly what we want on row 2. So now 3 spaces will be created on second row. And then of course when we move forward in the next for loop, this is where the printing happens, and this time we are printing I value, which is 2, and we are printing it 2 times. And I don't need to explain how this happens 2 times. You can easily dry run it or go back and look for the triangle pattern 1 video. This condition is exactly the same. Again, you'll come at the end of the for loop, end of the outer for loop, you'll execute this cout endl, you'll come on new line. Again, you'll go at the start of the for loop, and now you will say I plus plus, so I will become 3. So when I becomes 3, when you go inside the for loop, now you're saying k equals to n minus I. N is 5, 5 minus 3 because I has become 3, so k will become 2. Correct? 2 has to be greater than 0 and k minus minus, so it will take the values of 2 and 1. Correct? Which means that now the for loop will run 2 times, and 2 times it will create 2 blank spaces, and that is exactly what we want in the third row. So 2 blank spaces will be created over here, and then this for loop will be done. You'll move forward with the next for loop. Over here you're printing I value, and it will be printed 3 times. So you'll print 3 because I has become 3, and you'll print it 3 times. When you come outside this for loop, that is the second inner for loop, you'll say cout endl, you'll come to the new line. Then you'll go at the start of the for loop, you'll say I plus plus, I will now become 4. So when I becomes 4, you'll go inside the outer for loop, you'll say k equals to n minus I. N is nothing but 5. I has become 4, so 5 minus 4, you'll say 1. So k has become 1. And your condition is k has to be greater than 0. So 1 is greater than 0, yes. But you're saying k minus minus, so the next iteration k will become 0. So k can only take the value 1 because once it becomes 0, this for loop will stop working. So this for loop now will run only 1 time, so 1 space is going to be created. And then you'll move on with the next for loop, which is doing the printing work. And you're printing I has become 4. So you'll print 4, and 4 will be printed 4 times. Don't ask me how, we've already seen this. You can dry run this for loop again if you want. After this, you'll come at the last line cout endl, you'll come to the new line. Then you'll come at the start of the for loop, I will now become 5. So now when I becomes 5, you're saying for int k equals to n minus I. N is 5, I is also 5. So n minus I will become 5 minus 5, which is going to be equal to 0. So when k becomes 0, what happens is the condition becomes false itself, because after the initialization the condition is checked first. Because remember, for loop and while loop is a entry controlled loop, and in any entry controlled loop the condition is checked first. So your checking is k greater than 0. We just said k is 0. Is 0 greater than 0? No. So this condition has become false. So now we will not execute this cout and you will not create extra space. Of course, if you observe in the 5th row, because we are on the 5th row, we don't need any space. We simply have to print 5 times 5. So that's why we will not execute and create extra space now. And this for loop will not execute. You will carry on with the next for loop, and in this for loop is where we actually print the values. So now we are printing cout I. I is nothing but 5. We are gonna print it 5 times. Then you'll come at the end of the for loop, that is outer for loop, you'll say cout endl. You'll come at the start of the for loop, you'll say I plus plus. I will become 6. And when I becomes 6, this condition becomes false, because 6 is not less than or equal to 5, because n is 5, right? So then you will come outside the outer for loop. And if you observe the command prompt, we have basically got our output exactly like what we want in this triangle pattern. So we simply had to create extra spaces, and this extra spaces was created by this for loop. Okay, and this condition is very important because it is dependent upon the outer for loop values. Okay, alright. So this was triangle pattern 3, which is pretty much exactly same as pattern 1 with the addition of this extra for loop. And now let's see pattern 4. Now if you observe pattern 4, it is exactly the same as pattern 2, with the only change happening is this extra space that we have to create again in a for loop. Okay, and that is why we have this extra for loop. So if you go back in this video and see pattern 2, and if you just exclude this for loop, everything else is exactly the same as pattern 2. Okay, because in pattern 2 also we were printing 1 5 times first, then we were printing 2 4 times, then we were printing 3 3 times. It's just that there was this space which was not there in pattern 2, so the triangle was something like this, right? And that is a mirror image of this pattern 4, correct? So we have to manually create this space in the command prompt using some code, and that is why we have an extra for loop. So let's quickly start with the outer for loop. We are saying int I equals to n. So I equals to 5, because n is nothing but the number of rows, which is equal to 5. This is not gonna change. The condition is I has to be greater than or equal to 1. And we are saying I minus minus. So when we start with 5 and when we say minus minus, 5 will become 4. 4 is greater than equal to 1. 4 will become 3. 3 is still greater than equal to 1. 3 will become 2. 2 is also greater than equal to 1. And then 2 will become 1. Because 1 is also equal to 1. It is not greater than 1, it is equal to 1. And when I will become 0, this condition will become false. So outer for loop is going to run 5 times, which is what we want because we have 5 rows. And remember, outer for loop always or is most likely associated with the number of rows. Then we go inside. We have this extra for loop, which as I mentioned is used to create this extra space. But for the first row, if you observe, we don't have any space, right? So we want space creation from the second row. From the second row, we want 1 space. For the third row, we want 2 spaces. For the fourth row, we want 3. And for the last row, we want 4 spaces. This is what we want to create. So again, we have the for loop. We are saying k equals to n minus I. So k equals to n is nothing but 5. We just said minus I. I we also said is 5. So 5 minus 5 is equal to 0. So k is become 0. And the condition is k has to be greater than 0. But we just said k is 0. So is 0 greater than 0? No. So this condition becomes false itself for the very first time. And that is exactly what we want for the first row. We don't want any space. So we don't want this for loop to run. We don't want this extra space. That is what is happening in this cout. So of course, since this condition has become false, this for loop will not run for the first time. And the second for loop will do its work, which is printing the value 1 5 times. And this is exactly same in the pattern 2. So I'm not gonna waste time. So 1 is gonna be printed 5 times. So let's print 1 5 times. After this for loop, we have cout endl, which is taking to the new line. Then you'll come at the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, so I will now become 4. Okay, so now I has become 4, and you'll go inside the for loop, you'll say k equals to n minus I, k equals to 5 minus I has become 4, so which means k is 1. So k has become 1 and 1 is greater than 0, yes. And you're saying k minus minus, so in the next round itself, k will become 0 and this condition will become false. So this for loop will run only one time, and when you go inside this for loop, we have nothing but cout with this extra blank space. So you'll create extra blank space. Then you'll come at the start of the for loop, you'll say k minus minus, so k will become 0 because initialization happens only once. And then you'll say 0 is greater than 0, no. So this for loop will stop working, you'll proceed with the next inner for loop. And in the next inner for loop, you're simply gonna print 2 4 times, just like we did in pattern 2. So not explaining how this second for loop works, you can try run it step by step if you want again, but it is exactly the same as pattern 2. Alright, so after that you'll say cout endl, come to the next line. Then you'll go to the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, I will become 3. So I has become 3, now you'll say k equals to n minus I. So 5 minus 3 is equal to 2. So k has become 2, 2 has to be greater than 0, and you're saying k minus minus. So k will take the values of 2 and 1, which means that this for loop will run 2 times, so 2 spaces are created. After that, this for loop will stop working, you'll proceed with the next for loop, which is doing the printing work. So printing 3 this time, because you're saying n, which is 5, minus I, which has become 3, plus 1. So 5 minus 3 is 2, plus 1 is 3, so you're printing 3, and it is gonna happen 3 times. So this is exactly the same as pattern 2. Then you'll say cout endl, come on the new line. Again go to the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, I will become 2. When I becomes 2, you say k equals to n minus I, which is 5 minus 2, which is equal to 3. So this time 3 has to be greater than 0, and k minus minus, which means k will take the values 3, 2 and 1. So this for loop will run 3 times and it will print 3 blank spaces. So 3 blank spaces are created. After that, this for loop is done. You'll move with the next inner for loop, which is going to be doing the printing work, and it is simply going to print the number 2 times. After this, you'll come at the last command, which is cout endl, come to the next line, go to the start of the for loop. You'll say I minus minus, I was 2, I will become 1. So when I becomes 1, you'll say k equals to n minus, which is 5 minus I, which is equal to 4. So is 4 greater than 0? Yes. And k minus minus, which means 4, 3, 2 and 1 are the values that the k value or k variable will take. So that means this for loop will run 4 times and 4 blank spaces are gonna be created, because that is what this cout is doing. After that, this for loop is done, you'll proceed with the next for loop, which is printing 1 time. Okay, this is 4, which is going to be printed 2 times. Okay, and then for this last iteration, it is going to print 5 1 time. Then you'll come at the end of the for loop, you'll say cout endl, come on the new line, go to the start of the for loop, you'll say I minus minus, I will now become 0. So when I becomes 0, this condition becomes false, because 0 is not greater than or equal to 1. Correct? Your condition is I has to be greater than or equal to 1. So once it goes below 1, this condition becomes false and the outer for loop itself stops working, and this entire code block is stopped working, and you'll come outside the for loop. And if you observe the code, we have basically got our triangle just like we want over here. Correct? This is the pattern that we want. Okay, so this is triangle pattern 4. I know I went a little fast, but I hope you've got the basic understanding of how to understand pattern printing programs as a beginner. The best way is to take a pencil and paper and dry run the code, because when you start to make your own code as a beginner, sometimes it is confusing. So best way to learn it faster is to actually see the code yourself, see the solution, and take a pencil and paper and dry run the solution and see how the conditions in the for loop are working in coordination with each other to create different patterns. So yeah, these were the 4 different patterns. for the half pyramid, simple triangle with incremental numbers. And now let's quickly jump to the Dev C++ IDE to also see the code, because this was just the working side, but also let's understand the practical side, that is the implementation and the C++ code. We'll just glance through it because it is exactly the same that we have seen over here, the for loops. So I've already written it. We'll just simply run it. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, I have opened up my Dev C++ IDE and I've already typed a lot of code. So each of this function, you can see void half pyramid number 1, void half pyramid number 2, then we have void half pyramid number 3 and half pyramid number 4 corresponds to the pattern 1 to 4 that we've just seen. And of course, I'm not gonna again type this from scratch because this is the exact same code that we've just seen on the digital blackboard. Don't worry, I'm gonna be sharing this code with you guys, so you can check out the link in the video description to our official website, to this article where you'll find all the different codes. And in the main function, what we are doing is we are creating an integer variable num and we are asking the user to enter the number of levels. So in our digital blackboard, we were considering the n as 5, but here we are taking that n value from the user. We're taking it from the user and then we are printing all the different patterns by calling the different functions. Okay, pretty easy. This is the int main where we are calling all these different patterns. Just save this, go to execute, compile and run. Let's see if things work. So this is where the number of levels is being asked. Let's enter 5 like we had in the digital blackboard. If I enter, you can see all the patterns are being printed. So this is pattern 1, this is pattern 2, this is pattern 3, this is pattern 4. So pattern 1 and pattern 3 are exactly same. They are mirror images of each other. Pattern 2 and pattern 4 are exactly same. They are mirror images of each other. Now if I were to add an extra level, let's say 6. So you'll get extra levels. You can see now we have one more extra row with number 6 in every pattern. So this code is working perfectly fine. All the 4 different patterns are working fine. So we've seen the implementation as well as the practical aspect of these 4 different pyramid patterns. Okay, so I'm going to conclude this video over here. I hope you've understood the entire pattern printing programs. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments how this video was. Definitely share it with your friends. These pattern printing programs are important and at times confusing. We'll do many more pattern printing programs in this course, in this playlist. So definitely subscribe and turn on the notifications if you want to see many more pattern printing programs. And if you have any specific suggestions of patterns, do let me know in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.